go and get started, if that's okay with y'all. Yeah, so welcome to CONDG. This is the first CONDG of 2021. Canal Winchester. What's up, Canal Winchester? The first CONDG of 2021, and as you can see, if you've been here before, we've got a brand new logo, courtesy there of, oh gosh, Flannel to Lace on Twitter. I'm blanking on her name, but Flannel to Lace is the Twitter account. And that's a brand new logo for us, some brand new branding there with the dot and .net representing Central Ohio. I think that's the idea there. Please follow us on Twitter, check out Meetup, check out Facebook so you can see upcoming meetings and you can interact with us and see what's going on. Another place you can find us is our YouTube channel, which doesn't have an official URL yet. We don't have enough subscribers. I would appreciate a subscribe so we can actually get a better URL, but I've also put a bit.ly there on the screen. bit.ly/CONDG YouTube. This is where we post videos after the sessions, assuming the speaker is okay with us doing that. It used to be on my channel, my personal channel, but we've created a CONDG channel here. So that way, if I'm hit by a bus, you still have CONDG videos. So go check out the previous meetups there and subscribe while you're at it. I did mention the raffle. We have some licenses for JetBrains products. We've actually got, I think, a total of 3 JetBrains licenses. So I hope you all like JetBrains stuff because we've got lots of licenses to give away. And I've got some Couchbase swag that is here at Couchbase Ohio headquarters. I've got some stuff left in the closet I can send to you. That'll be the 4th place prize. Thank you for posting that link there, /4. Appreciate that. We are open to other swag and prize sponsors too. So we're starting a new year. The prize closet here at Couchbase Ohio headquarters is getting a little empty. So if you work for a company or have some sort of organization you like to promote by giving away swag or prizes or whatever, please contact us. We'll get contact information here towards the end. We'd love to get you here on the slides and promote you and talk about you and have you participate. So just let us know. Doesn't have to be anything huge or expensive or amazing. Just fun stuff that people like to get. That we used to get in person conferences. Some other groups that are in the area in Central Ohio. So the Central Ohio Azure Meetup. They have, go to coazure.org or their meetup link there. They're also on Twitter. They meet, I believe, every second Monday. Not at the Microsoft Office anymore. I believe they're meeting on Teams at least. The Columbus App Dev User Group. They are using Teams/Twitch, I believe, so you can go find them, columbusappdevusergroup.com, or their meetup link, or their Twitter right there. I believe they meet every 3rd Monday. PASS, Professional Association SQL Server, sometimes known as CBus PASS here in Columbus. I updated this slide earlier this week, but this is already out of date. The PASS organization has ceased operations. So it may not be called that much longer, although it may be because Redgate has just, I guess, made some sort of agreement with PASS to either purchase or transfer some sort of ownership of those resources to the Redgate company. So they are making some changes there. I don't know if that means it's going to stay the same name or what, but anyway, go check out the meetup there, CBus PASS on Meetup, and see what they're up to. There's also the Let's Talk IT Columbus group. Which is sort of non-technical topics for technical people, and you can check that out there. It's a great group. You can check out Meetup link there at the bottom of the page. Also, you can email aaron.petrie@improving.com if you wanted to get more information about that. I assume they don't meet in person right now. They're probably meeting on Teams or Zoom or something. You can go check that out there. Maybe get a screenshot of that because that's maybe a bit hard for you to write down at the moment, or someone could post that into the chat. I'd appreciate that. One last plug here, the C# Advent. This is over in December 25th, of course, but I thought I'd get one more quick plug for it here because the content is still up there. All the links are still there going to all those different entries. Great stuff. We'll be doing that. I'll be doing that again this year. This will be the last slide you'll see for now. I just wanted to remind you in case you haven't had a chance to catch up on that yet. Go to csadvent.christmas and check that out. Some cool stuff. Meeting calendar. So it's pretty much a blank slate. It's a tabula rasa. We've got Jeremy Clark for today. That's a great talk for ASP.NET for absolute beginners. Now, I'm not an absolute beginner. However, I am still looking forward to this because there's lots that I don't know about ASP.NET MVC. So I'm very much looking forward to it. It's a great topic to kick off the year. We're looking for speakers for the rest of the year to fill out this calendar. So if you know someone who likes to speak, if you would like to speak, please contact us and get in touch, and we'll be glad to put you on the calendar. Here's some ideas for topics that we've talked about, the organizers have talked about, we'd like to see this year. It doesn't have to be something on this list, but these are things I think that people in the group would like to see topics presented. So if anything up here that you are familiar with, you like to speak about, or if you know a speaker that you like, oh yeah, I know a guy who does a great Dapper presentation or knows Dapper really well. It'd be great to get him to speak. Let us know, because since we're still remote, we can approach just about anyone and make a case for them to come speak, which is much more difficult to do in person with travel. But while we're still remote, we can get great speakers like Jeremy, for instance, to come and talk to our group. So let us know. I'm already seeing some chat about it in the chat there about what topics you'd like to see. But yes, recommend speakers. If you want to be a speaker, just let us know. If you want to contact us, here's the email address right here at the bottom there. That's my email address. You can contact me. If you know the other organizers, you can contact them as well. By the way, if you're looking for work or if you're hiring, please use the Twitch chat as much as you'd like to do that networking. You're absolutely free to say, hey, I'm looking for a job, or hey, I'm hiring. That's totally fine, especially if you're in the Central Ohio area. If you want to be more discreet about it, if you're worried that your employer is going to see this and say, hey, wait a second, that's fine. You can send me an email, my address right there, and I'll make that connection more discreetly, kind of behind the scenes. I've done that since we started going remote, and I've made some connections so far. So I don't get any sort of extra kickback for that or any bonus. I'm just trying to provide a service since we can't meet in person right now. Happy to make those connections. Okay? All right. And if you're looking to help us out, again, we're going to start the new year fresh here. If you're looking to help us out, if you've got ideas for things to improve or speakers or anything you'd like to help with, you can contact any one of us. I don't know if any of them are in the chat right now. Certainly I am watching, but these other three, Alan Barber, Matt Elin from Tech Elevator, of course, some of you know him, and Calvin Allen. You can contact any of us, and we'd be happy to get your suggestions, get you involved in any way we can. If you're new to Twitch, just the bottom right of the screen there, assuming you're watching this on a desktop, is the chat. That's where you can ask questions during a presentation. Jeremy will be monitoring that on one of his 10 monitors in his command center, and I'll be monitoring it as well, just in case he's too distracted by delivering his excellent presentation. And so ask those questions. We'll get those to Jeremy and get those answered. Just drop them in the chat there anytime, and we'll be happy to look at those questions. Okay, enough slides. Let's get on. Enough pre-show slides. Let's get on with Jeremy and some great content here. You missed my email. I'll put it in the chat here once I switch over to Jeremy. But let's bring him over on the screen here. Let's take off the slide deck there. Okay. And Jeremy, can I get a sound check from you, please?
Hello.
All right. Can everyone hear Jeremy okay? Is the volume loud enough? Can you maybe say a full sentence for us there, Jeremy?
Oh, you want me to say a full sentence? Okay. I'm here. Hello. Welcome.
Okay. Sounds like everyone can hear you okay. So I'm going to take myself off the screen and go on mute, and I will hand it over to Jeremy Clark. Everyone give him a virtual round of applause.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. As Matt said, it's great. I miss user groups in person because, talking to people face to face is so much different. But it is nice. I live in Northern Washington, so I wouldn't normally be able to get to Central Ohio unless I'm out there for some other reason. So it's a great chance to be able to share with you. And it's nice that we've got people from all over the world joining us too. So if you see me looking this direction, I'm checking the chat on Twitch to see if I'm missing anything. Otherwise, I do try to look directly at you so you know that I'm here and I can see you, but not really. So my name is Jeremy Clark, and my website is jeremybytes.com. You can see it there on the screen, BYTES. And if you go out there, you will find links to this talk, including the slides and code samples and everything else. And there's also a GitHub link, which has some more resources, and we'll be looking at that in just a minute. But first, I kind of want to talk about what this topic is and why I'm giving it. So this is ASP.NET MVC for absolute beginners. And really the reason I'm doing this is I've been doing .NET for quite a while now. I actually started in 2005, and that was .NET 2.0 timeframe. And I remember when I first started, I'm like, oh, I must be late to the game because, I didn't get in on the 1.0 and 1.1 bandwagon. But here it is, 16 years later, and it doesn't seem late anymore. So one of the things is I'm not primarily a web developer. So I kind of dabble in web development, but my history is mostly desktop development. And I would need to get into the web development world, from time to time. And so I actually started back with ASP.NET. I think that was ASP.NET 2.0. Again, that's a long time ago. Don't even remember the year. But when I first got started with it, I remember saying there's a lot of magic in this framework. And if you understand the magic, it works really well. If you don't understand the magic, it's really easy to get lost. And so, I've kind of done, I'll say, a few MVC applications over the years. And this past year, actually probably 2 years ago now, I was taking an application that I had that was a desktop application, or actually more technically a console application. I'm like, I bet I can put this on the web. And so spun up an MVC application, kind of started doing things. And I'm like, you know what? The reason I was able to put this together so quickly is because I understood some of those conventions. And if you don't understand the conventions, again, it can be a little daunting. Before actually digging into this, I just want to show you what we're going to build today. So we're going to kind of start with file new project dish sort of things and go from there. I actually do have a library that's going to do a lot of the work for us. But I'm going to type .NET run on the command line for my completed project. This is actually going to spin up a web server that then I can use if I can get to the browser that's not open. Because of course it is. So what we have here is a website which is pretty much the default template if you do file new project for MVC, which we'll do in a bit. What I did was I changed the home screen so that there's some inputs here. You can see I have a size, a selection for color, and a selection for algorithm. What is this all about? Well, I am generating mazes. And this was a hobby project that I got involved with. There's actually a book called Mazes for Programmers, which is written in Ruby. And so I did a C# version of it, and I'm like, hey, I can make a web version of this pretty easily. And it's kind of cool because what you can do is you can set your size, your color, and then pick an algorithm. Binary tree is a good place to start. Hit generate maze, and there's a bitmap of a maze that comes out. And you'll see that the colors here, what they represent is the center square in the maze is white. And the colors get darker the further that you get away. So in this case, the binary tree algorithm that I chose has what's known as a diagonal bias. And so you can kind of see from the colors, there's kind of a big diagonal slash that kind of goes through this. And these different algorithms have different biases to them. Sidewinder actually has a vertical bias, so you tend to see more up and down sort of things as you go. And then there's also some more random ones. Let me just make this a tiny bit bigger. We'll do 100, and let's pick a different color. How about green this time? And hunt and kill, which is a random walk. And so this one takes a little bit longer to generate, and it's not necessarily deterministic. That one's not very exciting. Let me just hit that again, because I want things to be interesting. Okay, that one's a little more interesting. And this one kind of generates longer paths. So the designs are kind of interesting. They actually do look like game maps when you do higher ones. Recursive backtracker is also another random walk that tends to build longer paths. And if you have patience, I'll kind of show you a little bit later. And again, this code is available for you to download in its completed state if you don't want to build it yourself. And just playing with it, some of the larger sizes that you can do take a little bit longer to generate, but then you get things that kind of look like maps of Middle Earth. So I've just kind of had fun with this. You can see it's not a serious project at all, but it's kind of cool. Ooh, I like that one. And this is just a PNG file that's being generated and output to the browser. But we're going to use this to understand how .NET MVC or ASP.NET MVC works. So let's go from there. Let me shut that one down. There we go. We'll grab a new terminal window. And I'm going to be spending most of the time in code, but I do want to kind of do a little bit of preliminary work because MVC is a certain pattern, and it's the model view controller pattern. And so kind of the pieces of this is the model is really kind of the data and often the business logic of the application. So this is kind of like the guts that actually do interesting things or pull data or process things. Then you have the view, which is the UI. And this is strictly UI elements. And in the case of our web application, it's all the HTML markup. It's any buttons and text boxes that we might have. So anything that the user sees, that is the view. And then in between this, we have a controller. And a controller is really kind of the orchestrator of this process. So a request will come in and the controller gets the request. And then based on the request and any parameters that come along with it, maybe it's form data, maybe it's query string stuff, it decides, okay, what data do I need to use, right? What model do I need to go get stuff from? And what view do I want to output? And so it's kind of the orchestrator for this. And I have just a little diagram to kind of show how this flow works. So starting out, again, a request will come into the controller. Based on that request, the controller will say, oh, okay, well, I need to go get data from a model. Maybe I need to update some data in a model. And then the model will return kind of whatever it has. Maybe it's a listing of catalog items or products for your catalog. And then the controller will take that information and then decide, hey, this is the view I want you to show. And here's some data to go ahead and stick in that view. So this is kind of the overall how things fit together. So are you ready for code? Do I get a thumbs up on code? Maybe. Fine, I'll talk to myself. Okay. Now, a couple things I will point out, and I'm gonna ask for Matt's help. So I sent Matt a link to the GitHub repo, and if he could paste it into the chat, that would be great because I can't paste it in real easily. But I want to point out some resources that are here. So I mentioned here's some completed code that we have up here. And then there's a README that kind of gives an overview. And then there's some resources down at the bottom. So I'm going to be using the command line interface for a lot of building the projects and things. And if that's something that's new to you, unfortunately, I'm not here to teach it to you. But the good news is I do have a tutorial, which is all about getting comfortable with .NET from the command line. So this is something that kind of became more intriguing with .NET Core and with .NET 5 currently, .NET 6 going forward. So I kind of like it because I've also been doing some more cross-platform work. And so the command line Visual Studio is not available on all platforms. So I love Visual Studio 2019, very, very powerful, but I also love that Visual Studio Code is available on Mac and Linux without having to do any, without jumping through hoops. And the command line interface is available in all of the environments as well. So I found getting comfortable with the command line interface for .NET, well, that says .NET Core because that's when I put the tutorial together, but we're now in the .NET 5 world. It has been really useful to me. So if you see me typing some command line stuff and you're like, what was he doing? Go check out that tutorial. Okay, so here's a folder that we're going to start with. I'll just do a directory listing so we can see where we are. So right now I have a folder called maze-library, and this has all of the maze functionality, the algorithms and the output and generating the bitmaps and so forth. So that's all of the logic that I'm going to bring in later. So that's its own folder, and it's also its own C# project. So it's a library project. We'll look at that later. I'm going to start with a brand new folder, which isn't created yet for our application. And then I also have a snippets.txt file. And this actually has some code that I will copy and paste in. And the snippets.txt, that is in the GitHub repo as well. So if you want to go back later, I will be typing a few things in that are 1 or 2 lines, but anything that's more extensive is going to be in that snippets file. Okay. So I'm going to start by creating a new folder that will hold our ASP.NET MVC application, and we'll call it maze-web. And so we'll create that, and I'll navigate to it. And right now I have an empty folder. The command line .NET starts out all the command line options, and .NET New is an important one because it lets us create projects and solutions and other files. And I'm going to be looking at this one here, which is an ASP.NET Core web app, and in parentheses, which is cut off, it's model view controller. And the little command for that is MVC. So if I type .NET New MVC, it will create me one of those. And if we do a directory listing now, we can see that we've got several folders. You know, we can see there's one for controllers, one for models, one for views, and then the program.cs and startup.cs. So it just built that all for us. We also have a project file, which we can see is called mazeweb.csproj. And it names it after the folder by default. You can actually do a custom name with some more command line parameters. Okay, so we actually have a working application now. I'm going to type .NET run, and that will build this project and also run it. One thing I really love that started with .NET Core is self-hosted web applications. So again, I've been doing .NET for a long time, and I am not a fan of IIS Express. And if you don't know what IIS Express is, try to keep it that way. But basically what I just did was I ran an executable that includes a web server. And so we can see I've got this says listening on a HTTP localhost 5000. So, I just hit Control-C, which shut it down. I'm really good at that rather than from the command line highlighting it and right-clicking it to put it on my clipboard. Okay. And, oh, good. I closed my browser again. Okay. So let's go ahead and paste and go to localhost 5000. Now, one thing that's interesting is you'll notice that I'm not actually at localhost 5000. I'm at HTTPS localhost 5001. And that's because by default, it redirects to HTTPS. And if we go back to our terminal, in addition to listening on port 5000, we can see this first one actually says HTTPS on 5001. So I just want to show that redirect is already built in. If you don't have a development certificate on your machine, There is a command line thing in the .NET world where you can add one really easily, and that's actually referenced in the articles that I have online. But we want to look at what this built for us so that we can understand how this MVC thing works. So there's only a couple options in the default template. So we're currently on the home page. There's also a privacy page and a really exciting link to privacy down in the footer as well as the header. If I click on privacy and then we take a look at the URL, we can see it went to localhost 5001/home/privacy. Excuse me. And if we just click on home, then the URL doesn't have anything after it. So let's see kind of how this works. By first, we're going to talk about routing. And so I'm going to shut down the application for just a moment. And I'm going to type code and then dot. And what this will do is it'll open Visual Studio Code to this maze-web folder. And so that way I don't have to worry about locating things and opening it. Visual Studio Code is just there. And since I'm not going to be really modifying this application for a while, I'm going to type .NET run again, just so that we have that website running while we're going through some of this, these conventions. Okay, so I'm going to start with the startup file. And it's the very last one that's listed over here on the left in the File Explorer. And this has something in it that's really important, which are the endpoints. So we can see here on line 49, we have something that's talking about endpoints. And on line 51, we have something that's talking about a controller route. So it's saying, hey, I want to create a route. And what this is this is telling our application, based on the URL that's coming in, here's what I would like you to do. So in this case, let's look at this pattern. So the pattern on line 53, we can see first it starts with controller, and it says controller equals home. And then there's a slash, and it says action, and action equals index. And then there's a slash, and then it says ID with a question mark. So what this is telling us is by default how that URL will be parsed. So if we type in a URL, it's going to assume that the first part is the name of the controller. The second part is an action on that controller. And the third part is an ID. Now, the question mark on the ID means this is optional. So if it's not there, this pattern will still match. And then where it says equals home and equals index, that's setting up default values. So if we go back to our website and look at the URL that we go to by default, we can see it doesn't have a controller or an action listed. It's just using the default values, which is home and index. And we can actually type in home, and it takes us to exactly the same place because I filled in the home controller. It's still using the index action that's specified as default. I can also say /index. And again, we'll end up in the same spot. So the full route would be home with the controller, index with the action. But because the defaults are set up, those are optional. Now, if I click on privacy, the URL says home/privacy. So this is going to the home controller. We're still using the same controller, and we're using a different action, which is privacy. So that kind of shows us kind of how our URLs get parsed, but I've been doing a lot of talk about controllers and actions and exactly what are those. So let's flip back to our code. And as I noted earlier, there are folders for the controllers, for the models, and for the views. And this is where some of the magic starts to happen. Because if I have a controller, or a route, I should say, and it says, I'm going to use the home controller. Well, where does it find that? Well, it looks in the controllers folder. And in here, I have a file, which is called homecontroller.cs. And this class name on line 12 is home controller. So the way the convention works is, hey, if I have home as my controller name in the URL, I'm going to look for something named home controller. So the name of the controller with controller tagged on the end. And I'm going to look for it in the controllers folder. So what this means is if I have a new controller I want to add, if I name it something controller and stick it in the controllers folder, it will automatically get picked up. So there's no additional configuration anywhere else in order to hook that up. It gets wired automatically based on the conventions. So here's our home controller. Now, I talked about there being two actions. There's an index action and a privacy action. And those are functions that we have on our controller. So on line 21, I have a function that is named index, and it returns an iAction result. Now, an iAction result is something that an action returns, and it can be a view, meaning, again, the UI elements. It can be a file. It can be a string. So we can do string content if you're feeling really brave and you want to code up your entire UI by hand. You can do that. We're actually going to be looking at all three of those today. And then on line 26, there's another action called privacy. And so if you hit that privacy action on the home controller, that's the function that'll run. There's actually a third one on here too, on line 32, which is error. So if something goes wrong, it's going to hit this error action. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. Okay, so back to our kind of default state. So by default, our route says I'm going to the home controller and I'm going to use the index action. How do we see the UI? If I look on line 23 of my index action, it just says return view. Okay, great. What does that mean? Well, what that means is the system is going to return the default view for the index action on the home controller. And how is that specified? Magically through convention. And this is actually through a folder structure as well. So if we look at the views folder, you'll notice that there's a home subfolder. And so the layout for this is in the views folder, there'll be a subfolder for your controller. So the home folder has all of the views related to the home controller. And then underneath that, we have separate pages for each action that are named after the action. So you see that we have index.cshtml and privacy.cshtml. Now, CSHTML is a Razor page. So this is something that uses the Razor view engine. And it's kind of a mixture of C# code and HTML, hence the suffix CS, C#, HTML. And we'll look at that in just a moment. Now, again, if I just say default line 23 in my home controller, return a view, it's going to say, oh, okay, well, this is the index action. So I'm going to return this index.cshtml. And then the same thing happens on line 28. It would hit the privacy view. Okay, so let's venture into this index view and see what we have. Okay, and let's just collapse that so we can see a little more of this page. This isn't a complete HTML page. So what's happening here? Well, I can see I kind of have the important bits. Okay, so there's an H1 on line 6 that has a welcome, and then line 7 has some message with a link. And if we flip back to our application, Okay, here's our welcome, and then a line of text with a link in it. Okay, what about the rest of this? I've got a header that has menu items in it. It's not really exciting, but they're there. And I also have a footer, which also has a link to the privacy action as well. So where does all of this come from? Well, again, kind of I'll say by default, this uses what are known as layout pages. And a layout page allows us to build a frame that's used on every page. So for example, if I click to privacy, the stuff in the header is exactly the same, and the stuff in the footer is exactly the same. So I don't want to recode that each time. So let's put that into a shared location. And that's really what the layout is. Now, this one is a little more frightening. And you'll notice, in addition to the controller folder for home, the home controller under the views, there's also a shared folder. And the shared folder, if I open it, has something called underscore layout.cshtml. So it starts with an underscore, and this is something that, again, kind of magically gets wired in this case. And you get a big, scary web page. But what we can see is that this is actually, a complete web page, right? Starting on line 2, we've got the HTML tag. On line 3, we have the head tag. On line 11, we have the body tag. If we go down to the bottom, we have actually a footer section, which is inside the body. Yeah, okay. Inside the body, I should say. We have a header tag on line 11. This has all of the stuff that's in that menu bar stuff at the top. And then there is a footer down at the bottom, which I noted on line 38. So this has the copyright notice along with the link to privacy. And then in the middle, this little tiny section here, on line 34, you can see that there's an @ sign and it says render body. Now, when you're in a Razor View page, the @ sign means, hey, there's some C# code coming. So that's what it means. And render body is an ASP.NET MVC function that's built in. And what that will do is it will take everything from this index view that we have and stick it right there in the render body section. Now, there's a couple other things to look at here as well, because in our index view that we have, on line 1 through 3, we actually have that ampersand, or not ampersand, @ sign, I should say. The @ sign, which means, hey, here's some C# code, and view data. Now, view data is a dictionary. So it's something where we can put some name value pairs. So here you can see on line 2, we have a view data element, which is named title, and it is populated with home space page. And that's something that's available to the layout page. If I scroll up to line 6, so this is actually in the head section of our HTML page, there's a title tag on line 6, and it has an @ sign view data, square brackets title. And so what it'll do is it'll take that data, or the value, out of the view data and put it into the title tag. And again, if we look at our web page, let's see. Is my zoomer actually working on the stream? Yes, it is. Okay. Okay, good. So we can see it says home space page. So that's actually coming out of the view data. And the same thing with privacy and the other things as well. So again, where you see this @ sign, that's really saying, hey, there's some C# code coming. And then let's take a look at privacy as well. So our privacy view is about as exciting as the default home view. I have, in this case, view data that says privacy policy on line 2. And then on line 4, we're actually using that view data. So we're saying, hey, put the title in an H1 element in the section, and then there's a paragraph. And again, if we click on privacy, there's our H1 element, which has the view data, privacy space policy in it. And then if we look at our page title that's up in the tab, privacy policy. So there's kind of a lot of things that are going on that the infrastructure takes care of for us. And so I like that, because what that means is if I need to add a new view or add a new action, I kind of just have to create things with the right names and put them in the right locations. Yes.
Yeah, question for you, Jeremy, from Steph Himes. Can you explain why to use a view model versus using the view data?
Oh, so that's actually a good question. And I am actually going to be using a model once we start building our custom code. So view data is in fact a dictionary, and it is key value pairs. And it is really easy to say, okay, well, I want to put things in like the title of the page. I might want to keep track of, maybe here's the username or something like that. And so if all I need is kind of a dictionary of values, view data works great for that. Something else I can do is I can assign a model to the view. And these are often referred to as view models because they're models that apply to a view. And those could be whatever I want, which is nice. So from an object perspective, if I wanted to create an object with nested values in it, maybe a class that has a bunch of properties in it, some of those properties might be complex classes. I can put that into a model and not have to worry about doing key value pairs. Now, I know that in the modern world, we're used to dealing with JSON, which is key value pairs, but it is nice to have real objects from time to time. And so that's the difference. So view data is built in, don't have to do anything special. You can just add things to it. It automatically gets to the view. If you have a custom model, you have way more flexibility. And again, we'll see that as we go. Any other questions out there, Matt? Cool. Okay. Thank you for keeping up with that, because I am watching the scrolling go by and missed that question. Okay. Now there is one other thing I want to point to. Going back to the home controller, there was a third action, which is an error action. Now, if I look in the folder for the views, you'll see here it says return view, just like our other ones do. Well, where does it find this view? Well, if I look under the home folder, there's no error view. So there's no error.cshtml. Well, if it doesn't find something in the controller folder, it will look in the shared folder. And in the shared folder, there is something called error.cshtml. So this is nice because it does give us the opportunity to say, if I have a common error layout that I want to use on all of my pages, rather than creating these separate custom views for every controller, I can put it into the shared folder and it will automatically locate it. Whew, I've been talking a lot and very quickly. Okay, let me just check my notes to see if I skipped over anything important, because I have a tendency to skip over things when I get really excited about stuff. Okay. Okay, we talked about routes. That's good. We talked about controllers. That's good. We talked about that. Okay. I think we might be there. Or I should say where I want to be. So let's flip back to slides for a second, and we'll just kind of review some of the conventions. And if nothing else, these conventions are written down here. And these slides are in the GitHub repo. So later on, if you want to come back and find these conventions, they're all in one place for you. Okay, so the first slide that we have here is talking about the routes. And so again, the default pattern is controller name / action name / ID. And so in our little example here, we have localhost 5000 / catalog / list / 17. And that would get parsed as catalog as the controller, list as the action, and 17 as the ID. Now, routing is 100% customizable. And I'm not going to talk about building custom routes, but you can build your own route layouts, and you can have multiple ones. Now, the trick is if you do have multiple routes listed, when the ASP.NET engine is going through and saying, which of these should I use? The first one that it finds that matches is the one that it's going to use. So if you have a default route that you want to use, always put it at the bottom because you'll want to make sure nothing else hits the higher routes. And again, not going to be talking details of routes, but it is really kind of cool. And then as noted here on the slide, the route often will contain default values or optional values. We saw the default route with the new template. Home is the default controller, index is the default action, and there's an optional ID property. When we're talking about controllers, controllers go in the controllers folder. And so here, our project folder / controller / home controller or controller / maze controller. And then controllers are named with the suffix controller. And there's actually a typo right here on the slide. That should be maze controller, not maze controllers. If you name it differently, then you will get unexpected results. Ask me how I know. So,
I got a quick question. I don't think I've actually tried this. I've used this for so long, but does it go by the file name or does it go by the class name?
quite honestly, I don't know.
Okay.
That's a good question. And you know what? I was thinking about that yesterday, and I'm like, you know what? I've never tried that either.
Okay. They should line up, right? But it's one or the other.
I would assume, okay, and we know what that means, right? I would assume it goes by the class name because it would, file names don't really mean much. It's probably honestly going by the namespace. So let's see. Oh, lost my mouse.
We're getting some comments here that class name has to be the file name. I don't think that's true.
That actually is not true. You can have multiple classes in a single file.
Right.
So that's always fun. And don't quote me on this. Okay, pause the recording. But I think it's probably not going by literal folder structure. I think it's probably going based on namespace. Because, again, the default namespacing will have the folder name in it. Again, don't quote me on that because it's probably wrong. But I would say that the class name would be more important than the controller name.
That seems to be the consensus in the chat. And I think probably in reality, you shouldn't have them be different just to make things more confusing.
Just because there's so much magic going on to start with, I would say take the path of least surprise, right? But I am going to do some testing with that. Okay, so it's not just me. Matt also wants to know the answer to this question. So I will work on that later on. Okay, so let's flip back. Okay, and then we're going to be adding a new controller once we get to the more exciting things. Now, when we're talking about actions, again, what an action is a function that is within a controller class, and the name of the function matches the name of the action, and it returns an iAction result. Now, again, iAction result is an interface, and what that means is there can be multiple concrete types that implement that interface. So we saw by default, it uses view, and that is an iAction result. We'll also see that we can return a string, which we'll do in a little bit. And we can also return a file, which we'll do in a little bit. And there's other things that you can return as well. It just has to implement the iAction result interface. But we won't go into all of those options. Okay, now when we're talking about views, again, views are in the views subfolder, and there's a subfolder that has the controller name as well. So we saw we have views/home/index.cshtml, views/home/privacy.cshtml. And views can also be in the shared folder. And like we saw with the error, so it could be /error/ch shared/errors.cshtml. Wow, I should not try to say all that at the same time. And the views, again, by default, are named after the action. Now, when you say, when you are returning a view from an action, you can customize that. So you can say, oh, I don't want to return something called error. I want to return a view that's called something else. You can 100% customize that and use your own names. But again, kind of showing how the magic wiring happens. Because if we can use that, you know, I'm kind of the opinion, if there's code I don't have to write, then I don't want to write it. So if we can follow the conventions and have it kind of magically picked up, then that's what I'm going to want to do. Okay, so that's talking about the views. And then inside our CSHTML files, and again, these are known as Razor views or using the Razor view engine, that @ sign means, hey, there's some C# code coming. And we saw the render body earlier. In a few minutes, we will see this HTML text box 4 stuff. And this works really well with models. So we will be using a model for that. Okay, so basically everything we've looked at so far has to do with the default template. Okay, so I did new project. This is the template that I get, and this is how it works. So now that we have an idea of how this works, let's build some custom stuff, because that sounds pretty compelling to me. Let me, first of all, open up my snippets file, because I will be needing this quite a bit. I'll show you the snippets file in case you're interested. And again, this is part of the download. So it has a file that whatever this code goes in this case, it's a class. In this case, we have some markup for the index.cshtml, maze controller class, and so forth. So, and all of the code in place is in that completed project that is on GitHub. So if you don't want to follow along later on, that's fine. But if you do want to follow along later, you don't have to remember what all this stuff is. I'm going to put this on another monitor, and I'll just kind of be pasting things in as we go. Okay, so let's flip back to my terminal, and I'm going to stop the application we have running, and you use Control-C for that. And in fact, if you forget that, it says right here, press Control-C to shut down. So it's always there waiting for you. And I'm going to create a solution file, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the rest of this in Visual Studio 2019. And I do use the Community Edition, which is the free version. So you don't actually have to pay to download this, but it is Windows only. This actually does all work in Visual Studio Code. So if you wanted to do the rest of this in Visual Studio Code, that is extremely possible. And again, cross-platform, highly recommended. But it'll be easier to kind of have the integrated environment for multiple projects and so forth, and debugging and whatnot. Okay, so if I go up a level, I see I have a maze-library, which we haven't looked at yet, and maze-web, which is what I just created. I want to create a solution file at this level. And if I do .NET New, one of the options is in fact a solution file. You can see this right here, second from the end. So I can type .NET New SLN. That'll create me a solution file. And it is named again after the folder. So since I'm in an MVC-conventions folder, it creates a solution file with that name. Now, depending on what you're most comfortable with, you can open up this file in Visual Studio and then bring in the references to the other projects. Just to show you that you can do this on the command line, I'm going to do it on the command line. So if I want to add the maze-web project to the solution, .NET SLN add, and then find the project file. So I can say / maze web, and I always hit tab for command line completion. And then I want to find the CS_proj file. So if I have / maze-web / maze-web.csproj and hit enter, that just added that project to my solution. And I can do the same thing with the library. Add / maze-library maze-library.csproj. And I'm constantly hitting tab and letting it do completion for me. I'm using PowerShell inside Windows Terminal, but you can use whatever shell you want for all of this fun stuff. Okay, now there's one more thing that I want to do, and that is I want to add a reference from the library project into my web project that I just created. And you can do that from the command line as well. And I just want to show you this. So let me go back to the Maze web project folder, I should say. And so .NET add reference. And then now what I have to do is get to that Maze library project. So I can say ... to go up a level to the root, and then maze-library to go down into that one. And then again, grab the CS_proj file from there. And that just added a reference to between those two projects. So again, you don't have to remember that. If you go to the tutorial that I pointed to at the beginning that's referenced in the notes, it shows how to do this kind of stuff. Okay, but let's go back to the solution file, and we will just MVC conventions. I'm just going to say, hey, run this .sln file. And because I'm in Windows and I have that file association, it's going to open Visual Studio 2019 for me. Now, one reason I wanted to open up Visual Studio 2019 and show you some things is because that's what a lot of us use in corporate environments, if you're one of those lucky corporate developers. And there's one thing that's really weird. It's not weird, but if you don't change it, you're going to have a bad time. Before I show that, though, let me just show I do have a solution. Let me zoom a bit that has both of those projects in there. Now you'll see maze-web is bold. So that's set up as my startup project. And the secret to having that is that was the first project that I added to the solution from the command line. So it got tagged as the startup project. And then if I look at the dependencies, I can see that the web application does have a dependency on the library project. And that's what I did from the command line. So, and you could do the standard right click and add project reference. So you can do it this way as well. And if you're not familiar with that in Visual Studio, it's fun. Okay, now the thing that I do want to point out is it's really nice to be able to just hit F5 to run from Visual Studio, starting debugging and so forth. But the problem is right here. If you notice, next to the run button on the taskbar here, it says IIS Express. because Visual Studio is used to using IIS Express because that's what we did before .NET Core. Again, if you do still have to use that, you have my sympathies. But the first thing you'll want to do is go to this dropdown, change it from IIS Express to maze-web. And what that will do is, rather than trying to run this website under IIS Express, which may or may not work depending on how things are configured on your machine, if I set it to maze-web, it's going to use that self-hosting. Okay, so the same thing I was doing from the command line when I said .NET Run, I get the self-hosted website that I can navigate to. It will use the same thing if I change that dropdown. Okay, let's just run. So I'm going to hit F5. This will build the application, start it up in my default browser, which happens to be Chrome, and navigate me to that location. So this still, this is where we left things off. So let's, actually, did that start? I don't know which browser that started. And then to shut it down, kind of the keystrokes you'll see me do is you'll see it opened this terminal window, which is hosting the website. I'll often come here and hit Control-C to shut it down. And it says press any key to close the window. The other thing you can do is you can come to Visual Studio and say stop debugging, and it'll shut all that down for you. Okay, so let's add some interesting maze things. Now, I'll just kind of show you an overview of this maze project. I actually do have a completely separate GitHub project that goes through me building this maze application and starting the, doing a console version that outputs it to the console, doing something that outputs to a bitmap on your file system, doing something that creates a web page. Again, kind of a hobby project based on that book that I thought was fun. So there is an algorithms folder, and this has all of those different algorithms. Won't talk about them other than to say they're different ways of generating mazes, and they all have pros and cons. Some of them are extremely fast. Some of them are will create longer paths. Some of them will create twistier paths. So depending on what you want, that's all there. And then the grid has kind of the things that are used for output. So how do you get the color shading and all of that? And then the class down at the bottom of this that says maze generator, that's the thing we use to actually generate the maze. So let's start by figuring out what we need. And if I look at the maze generator class, it has a constructor here on line 11. And you know what? I'm not going to bother going into those details. So we know what we need based on the completed application that I showed earlier. We need a size for the grid, so that's a parameter that we need. We also need to figure out which color we want to use, and we also want the algorithm. So those are the three pieces of data that we need in order to generate the maze. And if I look at the color is actually an enum. So here in this colorgrid.cs file, there's something called maze color, and it is an enum with the valid colors. Now, the reason this isn't like an RGB picker is because the way the colors are implemented is kind of weird. And so you basically have like, well, what is that? 9 permutations. Well, 6 permutations of getting different colors out. Someday when I'm feeling brave, I will make it so you can do whatever color you want. But again, this is code that came out of that Mazes for Programmers book originally. Okay, so I'm going to create a model that contains those values. And like I mentioned, I have this snippets file, and it actually has a maze model in it. So let's go to the models folder. I'll say add class. And we will call this maze model. And then we can just put the insides in here. And so we have our three values. We have our size, how big is our grid. We have the algorithm, which we're collecting as a string to make parameter collection easier. And then maze color, or for the color, you can see this is a maze color. Now, even though I have a reference to the dependency, to the maze library project in our dependencies, there's no using statement here. I'm a lazy developer, so I'm going to put my cursor there, hit Control dot, and I'll say, hey, would you like to add a using statement to the top of your file? Yes, please. I love that kind of stuff. This is the kind of stuff I really like about Visual Studio. And I'm just going to remove the unused using statements. Okay, so these are the parameters that we want to collect, and these are actually parameters we're going to pass. We're going to collect them from our home screen and then pass them to our maze controller. Okay, so coming up next in our file, I'm going to change the index view for our home page so that we add the parameters to it. Okay, and I'll do this a little bit at a time. You'll see I've got a pretty big block of text here. I don't want to strain anybody's brain with that, so I'm going to do this in little pieces. So I'm going to my views folder, and then my home folder, and then my index. And we'll replace what's in this div with a welcome message and a form. Come on. There we go. Now, one thing that's really cool about ASP.NET MVC and the way that the forms work is that I can put an action as one of the properties of my form, and it will actually go to this this action. It'll create that route, or I'm sorry, it'll create the URL for that route automatically. And let me show you that by adding a button. So I'm going to grab a button and stick that in my form. So now I have a very exciting form that has an action to go to /maze, and I have a submit button. And let's run this. Okay, so there's our new UI, generate maze. So if I look at the URL, you can see it generated https://localhost:5001/maze. So it's saying, hey, I'm going to send this to the maze controller. Now, if I did have an action, a specific action on the maze controller I wanted to use, then you could put /maze/ something else. my brain won't make up something that's appropriate for maze, but you can actually put slashes in there as well, which we won't need today. Now, in this case, it says, hey, I don't know what that is because you don't have a controller named this. And we'll worry about that in just a bit. But first, let's finish building out this parameters page. Now, in this case, I want to create some UI elements like text boxes that will collect values for us. And yeah. And this is something where adding a model can be really useful. So I'm going to add a model to my index view. And you can have both a model and view data. So they're not mutually exclusive. So we'll say @model, and we'll say mazeweb.models.mazeModel. And what that does is it gives me access to the class that we just created with these particular properties. And let me use an HTML helper so that I don't have to code up this UI manually. So I just pasted in a paragraph, just 4 lines of code, lines 9 through 12. So not too much at this point. So I have a size label there. And then you see I have the @ sign, which means, hey, there's some C# code coming. And there's these things called HTML helpers in the Razor world. And what I can do is, in this case, I say, I want to create a text box that will be data bound to the size property of my model. And so this is the syntax for that. So html.textbox4, and then inside of that, there's a little, oh, yes?
Yeah, this is a question from David Freiling. You can
Mhm.
have only one model per page. Is that correct?
So I believe that is correct. I have not tried multiple models. If you do, generally what I would do is make a composite. So if I had like a customer and an order that I needed on the same page, I would create a composite object, a view model, which would contain both of those in it. And I guess I should talk a little bit about terminology, model versus view model. I'm not really using these definitions strictly in the application that I'm talking about. But generally, model is thinking about like, how does my data exist in logical form? A view model is, how does my data need to exist for this particular page, for this view, for this thing that I'm showing? So it's data that's been tweaked specifically to live in this view. And so generally, in rather than having multiple models, which I don't think is possible, I think you can only have one, I would create a view model. Mhm.
The follow-up question from David Freiling, would you use a view model to, quote, join model data then?
I generally would, but um, it gets it gets interesting once you talk about specifics for your application, because like everything else in programming, there's at least a half a dozen ways of doing them. When we see how this model gets passed back and forth between the controllers, then that question may make a little more sense as far as like one approach or multiple approaches. So we'll come back around to that if we need to, but let's see if it kind of gets answered there. Okay. Now the other UI elements that I have are a little more complicated. And actually, let's run this. Let's just see what it looks like. Okay, so now I have a size box. And when I click on it, there's a history here just because I've built this application many times, and this is my browser remembering these values. It's like, oh, I've seen you try to use something like this before. But normally this would be empty. This is Microsoft Edge trying to be helpful. Okay. The other pickers that we have are a little more interesting. And by interesting, I mean harder to understand, because they are drop-down lists. And I won't go into the details of this, but I just kind of want to show you this exists. And these HTML helpers can be very useful. I'm not doing any JavaScript programming here. So if you want to put JavaScript on the front end of this, more power to you. You can do it, perfectly possible. But these are things that are built, I don't want to say built, yeah, I'll say built in to ASP.NET MVC without having to go to external things or things that you have to code up yourself. So this HTML drop-down list for, it's saying here on line 16 that I want a drop-down list for a color property. And this is a set of display values and or display items and actual values. So this first, I'll say column because they're lined up, but you can see these are all separate items. We can see this first, I have a text. So this is what's going to show up in the text box or the drop-down list, I should say. And then the value is the value that's going to be posted when we post this form. And so in this case, other than no color and white, these match up one for one. The text is pretty much the same. Algorithm is almost the same, a tiny bit different. Because in this case, again, we have a drop-down list for algo on line 28. That's the algo property that we have here. And in this case, there is a difference because some of the algorithm text I want to display have dashes or spaces in them. And you can see those are removed from the values. Now, the values that I have here, well, we'll see the code in just a moment, but they match up with the class names that I have in my library. So they have the space, in this case, the same spacing and the same capitalization, or lack of spacing, I should say. So these are all Pascal case. So with that, we actually end up with a complete parameter picker. Okay, so I can pick a size and a color and an algorithm and say generate maze, and we get the same error that we had before because we still don't have a controller for that to go to. Okay, well, do I actually get to build a controller now? I believe I do. Okay, so let's shut this down. Shut this down, shut this down. Okay. And yes, okay, controller is next. So the next step is I'm going to create a controller for this maze, the maze controller that I need. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to copy and paste the home controller. I'll show you the reason why in just a bit. I'm going to copy the class or copy the file and then paste it into the same folder. And it wants to be home controller 1. I'm going to change this to maze controller. And we'll rename both the file and the class. And then I'll just need to change this right here. Okay, so the reason I did a copy and paste rather than like file new controller, and actually let me get rid of the privacy and the error actions. In this case, we'll just have an index. Has to do with something that's actually new in .NET 5. So the template in ASP.NET MVC for .NET 5 changed a little bit. And one thing that happens in the home controller by default is it has this iLogger field, and there's a constructor that injects that. Now, if we have time, which may not have time tonight, or if anyone's interested, I'll show how this logger works. But if you do from Visual Studio, if you do like the right click and say add controller, it actually doesn't add this. So the templates are a little out of sync right now. The logging functionality is pretty cool. I've been planning on writing a blog article about this, but I haven't yet. So if we have time, we'll get back to that. Okay, but let's just leave this kind of as it is. So I have an index action and it's returning view. Okay, does anyone have a guess of what this is going to do? Well, let's find out. Okay, so we'll make some selections here and click generate maze. Oh, and I get an error, but I get a different error this time. Now, what I want to point to has to do with this invalid operation exception that's at the top of the screen. And it's actually scrolling off, but it actually says the view index was not found. And this is showing the folders that it's looking in. So remember how we're talking about the conventions and the names of the views and where they can go? It's saying, oh, well, I'm looking in the views folder to see if there's a maze subfolder that has an index in it. And I didn't find anything. So I also looked in the views folder and then in the shared folder to see if it has an index in it, and it doesn't have it either. So I don't know what you want to do. So we can actually see that convention working. We're not going to be, and you see I've got in my console window a nice exception as well that tells me exactly that same thing. So let's close that. But in this case, I'm not going to return a view because ultimately I'm going to return a file, which is a PNG of the maze image, which we'll get to in just a bit. But I need some parameters for that. So again, I need that size value. I need the color value. I need the algorithm value. And so I can add parameters to my action. And ASP.NET MVC does its best to try to find values for these parameters. So let's create an int called size, a string called algo for algorithm, which is what I have in my maze model, and a maze color called color. Now I will need to, again, bring in a using statement for this. So I'll hit control dot on maze color and say, hey, bring in a using statement for the library. And let's output these. So rather than returning a view, I'm going to use a different content type. So we'll say return content, which is an iAction result. And then I can put whatever I like in here. In this case, it'll be a string. So we'll say, give me the size. I'm doing some string interpolation. Give me the algorithm and give me the color. So basically echo the parameters that you're getting. And now let's see what happens. I don't think my computer's getting slower as we go, but you never know. Okay. So we'll pick purple and binary tree. I'll hit generate maze. This time I did not get an exception. Let's see. Where's my zoom? Instead, what I got were the values. So what ASP.NET MVC does is when it has an action that takes parameters, it does its best to fill them in. What it also will try to do is it'll try to do things based on a query string that we have in a URL. So I could type in, for example, hey, why not? Looks like I've done this before. Size equals 20. Now, what we can see here is in this case, I didn't post the form, so it doesn't have all three values. And what happened is it said, well, based on the query string, I can fill in one of these parameters, which is the size. I don't know what the algorithm is. That's a string property, so I'm just going to leave that as an empty string. Now, the maze color is an enum, and I don't have anything for that either, so I'm going to use its default value, which is 0, which happens to be white. So that's why we're getting a value of white here. And so it will do its best to parse what's coming out of here. In fact, here's one where, we'll say the color is rust and the algorithm is Jack. And it doesn't matter what order we have these on the query string. The ASP.NET infrastructure tries to figure this out. So whether it's coming from a query string or from a post, the model that's in the post automatically gets posted back to us, which is really cool. It does a pretty good job of figuring things out, and capitalization is not important. So if I were to, do this like all caps, algo, it still works exactly the same. Jack 2, there we go. It still works the same. So it's not case sensitive or anything like that. It's just saying, okay, do I have something that matches this kind of by what it's called or by the type and by the type? Can I figure this out? So it's not a precise science, but it does a pretty good job, especially in a case like this. So I'm not explicitly passing never mind. I take that back. I am actually doing that. But maze color isn't a thing. An enum in the C# world is actually just an integer. Okay, let's finish building this out because I want to actually use these values to generate a maze. Now, a lot of this is going to be things that you don't need to fully understand because they're helper methods that's helping me parse these parameters in a format that my maze generator needs. But I'll just kind of go through these one at a time. So I pasted in a get size function. And what this does is it sets a default size of 15 if it's less than 0. So if the value is greater than 0, go ahead and use whatever the parameter is. Otherwise, if it's less than 0 or less than 0, use 15. So rather than throwing an exception, here's a default value that you can use. Okay. So we'll start by saying int maze size equals get size, get size, and then we'll pass in our parameter. Okay, so that's the first part. The next one is something I'm really not going to explain because it uses reflection. And this is kind of an advanced topic. Interfaces and reflection are kind of topics that are kind of near and dear to me. But what I need to do is I need to take the string for the algorithm that's coming in. So it might say, quote, binary tree, quote, Aldous Broder. And I actually need to turn that into an iMaze algorithm type. Okay, so I need to get that concrete type out of the maze library. And again, these concrete types are in this algorithms folder that we have. So I actually need one of these binary tree classes. If I say, give me quote string binary tree. And so this uses some reflection for that. Again, the red squigglies are because I have some missing using statements. So I'll control dot these to bring those in. But what this is saying is, okay, well, we have a compile time reference to this other library, and we know that there's something called recursive backtracker in there. So I'm going to set that up as my default. So if I can't parse the string, like if somebody passes in Jack and there's no Jack algorithm, I'm going to use recursive backtracker as my default. And so this opens up the assembly, looks for something that has the name, the class name that matches that string. And if it finds it, it'll use the activator to create an instance of it. Again, won't go into the details of this. I do have some information on my website. I should probably paste it into the links of the in the GitHub repo. I'll do that later. That talks about dynamically loading things at runtime. But basically, it'll take a string and turn it into an iMaze algorithm type. Okay. So that's the second thing we need. I need an iMaze algorithm, which we'll call algorithm. And what did I call it? Get algorithm. And then we'll pass in that string parameter that we have. Now, I don't have to do any processing on the color because this is already that enum type, the maze color. But I will need to do some processing on the way out. Yeah, okay. So I have enough information to call, oh, I need that generate method. Next one, generate. So this generate method will take our 3 parameter values, our maze size, our algorithm, and our color on line 57, and it'll turn it into a bitmap. And again, I'll need to bring in some using statements for bitmap. And this uses the things that are in the maze library. So on line 61, there's a maze generator class, and that takes a grid and an algorithm and turns it into a bitmap. So this get graphical maze on line 66 actually generates the bitmap, and then we'll return that bitmap. Okay, so we've just taken our parameters and turned them into a bitmap. Bitmap. And we will call this maze image. Generate. And pass in our values of maze size, algorithm, and color. Now that I have a bitmap, I need to somehow get that out as an action result. Now, the easiest way to do this that I found, and there might be more than one way, but this is the easiest way I found, is to stream this image as a byte array. So that means I need to take this bitmap and convert it to a byte array. And that's actually what this next part does. Turns it into a byte array. So this takes, it's called convert to byte array, and it takes an image and again, more control dots to bring in a memory stream. So this creates a memory stream, which is an in-memory stream based on the name. And then on line 75, the image has a save function on it. And it will save it to a file or save it to a stream. In this case, we'll save it to the memory stream. And then on line 76, we take the stream and say .to array, and that will give us a byte array. So if you need to get a byte array from an image, this is, again, a few lines of code that will get that for you. And if you don't understand all these details, that's fine. It's not really relevant to the understanding how ASP.NET MVC works, but I'm kind of doing some work in here to do this. Byte array equals convert to byte array, and we'll pass in our image. Okay, now that I have this byte array, I need to return it. And for this, again, I need an action result. Well, another action result that we can use is a file. Now, we can see that this file method, it comes from controller base. So if we look here, it actually says this is coming from controller base. And it takes two parameters, a byte array. Hey, I've got one of those, and a content type. So we can put in our byte array and say this is an image /PNG. Is that? Yeah, that's right. And so that's a content type. That's an HTML content type. So what I'm saying is, hey, I'm streaming a file back to you, and it's a PNG image. And this is actually enough code to get us a maze. Exciting. I'm so excited. Okay. I'm really hoping this works. Oh, the suspense is building. Oh, wow. I might need to reset my Zoom. Okay. That's better. Oh, okay. So let's say 25, small one to start with, teal and sidewinder. Fingers crossed. Hey, look at that. Yes.
Question from David Freiling. Could you choose to encapsulate these methods to a helper methods class and keep them out of the controller class?
That is actually a very excellent question.
And I would follow up and say, why would you do that?
Oh, okay. Well, there's actually different philosophies about controllers. So there's certain, I'll say a certain school of thought that says controllers should be as dumb as possible. So what I just did as far as generating the, parsing all of the parameters, generating the maze, putting it into a byte array that I could use, that's technically all kind of, I'll call it business logic for a broad definition of business, right? We're doing nothing practical here, but it's fun. And so there's a school of thought that says, you know what, that actually belongs somewhere else. And some people will put that in a model and a kind of a broader view of what a model is. So maybe I have a maze model that's in my application, and it has a method that takes parameters, the string parameters that we're getting from our UI, and will spit out a byte array that our controller can use more directly. So one school of thought is actually keep controllers as dumb as possible, so you don't actually put these this business logic in here. I'm I'm kind of and then another school of thought is I have a smart controller and my controller knows how to do this stuff. Either one, I would say, is a reasonable approach. I My tendency is I lean towards smart controllers until it becomes unmanageable. so so if my controllers start getting really big and complex, I want to split that up and put it somewhere else. Now, the reasons you might want to put it somewhere else is for unit testing. You might say, hey, this is easier to unit test if I have these things that are, kind of discrete units, and maybe they're even grouped somewhere that's, where we can keep them together but test them separately. As far as unit testing is concerned, unit testing a controller is really easy. So unlike trying to unit test a UI or something like that, unit testing a controller is not as difficult because um, you put your parameters in, index with our 3 parameters if I wanted to unit test this method, and then I could get out the file that comes back. Now, checking to see that that file is something you expect, that's a little complex. But the idea of splitting things out, it might be for unit testing, it might be for grouping your code. And again, you might want to do some reading. Unfortunately, I don't have any articles offhand, but I need to find some articles that kind of show the pros and cons between smart controllers and lean controllers. I don't want to say dumb controllers because versus lean controllers. So that's a perfect non-answer to the question, right? I'll put on my consultant hat and say it depends.
I was just going to say that's the it depends.
that's the proper answer. Okay, now there is another thing that I would like to do, if I can make this stop. And that is I want to put in a default value for the size parameter. I don't want that box to be blank when you walk up to it, because I'd really like you to be able to just go up to this and just hit go if you want to. And so what you can do is kind of preset that model. So I'm going to go back to my home controller. Now for this index, we're just saying return view. And as a reminder, if I go to the index.cshtml, the view, it has a model, which is a maze model. I'm not explicitly passing a maze model to the view. So this is going to start out with a maze model that is basically the same as if you said new maze model. So all of the properties are going to be default values. So are they default or is it null? No, it's got to be something, because otherwise, but it's not 0. Oh, okay. My brain isn't working. Because the size isn't coming up as 0. It's coming up as blank. That probably has to do with data binding. Okay, that's just me talking to myself. I want to pre-populate this. And I can do this by creating a model that I explicitly pass to the view. So let's say var model equals new maze model. And in this case, we'll say size equals 25. So we'll give this a default of 25. And now when we run the application, oh, why isn't that populated? Oh, I didn't. Oh, I'm so glad you're still paying attention. I am so glad that Matt is paying attention. Yes, I did not put this in. Okay, so if you actually pass it to the view, it works better. Okay, and then again, kind of the no color is the default. And then if we don't select something, then it uses recursive backtracker. So we actually get valid values out when we do that. So by setting the model and explicitly passing it through, that's one way that we can set up defaults for our UI. And so I find that to be useful as well. And we're actually, we kind of have a complete application now. So really the only question is whether you would like 10 minutes on logging or not. And if that's a no, I'm perfectly fine with that. Otherwise, show of hands, anyone?
If anyone has any questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat there. But we're getting 2 votes for logging so far, 2 yeses, 1 emphatic yes.
Okay, an emphatic yes and another one. Okay. Oh, more logging. Okay. And then for those of you who don't want to stick around for logging, thank you so much for stopping by. There's a question, how about validation? Unfortunately, validation isn't something I'm going to be talking about today. Validation is a big topic, but there are a lot of things you can do. So you can actually put notations on your model, to, for example, that would say this is a required field or something like that. And it will it will be enforced in the view. And it's kind of cool. It's if you need kind of basic validations that like this is filled in or this is greater than 0, then you can do it kind of attribute based, which is interesting because again, more code you don't have to write. But validation is something I'm not prepared to talk about tonight, but it is kind of cool. There's some magic in there. If you do, I would actually refer to Phil Japixi. He is an excellent resource. He's actually written books on ASP.NET MVC, and I know he has all kinds of stuff about validation. And cool. Thanks, Matt, for typing in his name properly into the chat. Okay, so about logging. So I kind of mentioned that the default template, at least when you create a new project on the home controller, it kind of automatically injects this iLogger thing. Well, it turns out that's been in .NET Core for a while now. They just haven't explicitly put the field that we have here on line 18. If I look in the project, there's these app settings.json files. I'm actually going to look at the app settings.development.json since we're kind of in the debugging world. And if I open this up, it's going to say, hey, your line endings. I love those messages. But this shows the this is the default configuration for logging in a development environment. So what this is saying is the default log level is information. So there's, I don't remember the exact hierarchy, but it's like debug, information, warning, error, so there's a hierarchy. And so this is saying by default, only things that are information and higher will make it to the log. So debug is not included in this default layout. The other thing is, you'll see line 5 says Microsoft. So this is saying, well, if the logging is coming from a Microsoft object, based on the namespace, then do warning and higher. Okay, so you're not going to get information, just warning and higher. Unless line 6, it's coming from Microsoft.hosting.lifetime, in which case do information and higher. So there's actually some really good articles on the Microsoft website that talk about logging and the default logging levels. I'm going to paste in a custom one, which the top part will be the same, but starting on line 8, I actually added another section. So the top, let's see, it's always fun to try to match up the curly braces. So this goes with that. Okay, so this console is a sibling to logging on line 2. Because with the logger that's included with ASP.NET MVC, you get 4 loggers by default. You get a console logger, you get one that does event tracing, and you get one that goes to the Windows event log. So that Windows event log that you can pop up that you never use, stuff goes to that by default. And the fourth one, I don't remember off the top of my head. Now, the console logger is what comes out on the console. And there's got to be a file logger in there somewhere too. Now, what I did was I said, okay, well, for console logging, I would like you to change the log level from the default, which is the top part, and say anything that's coming from the maze_web namespace, I want you to log debug and higher. Okay, so it'll pick up debug in addition to information warning and error. Now you'll notice it says maze_web, not maze-web. That's actually something I didn't point out. In the .NET Core / .NET 5 world, it's really common to name your projects with a dash in them, like we did, maze-web. But if we look at the namespace, dashes aren't allowed in namespaces. So it uses maze_web for the namespaces. Okay, so I've just changed this so that debugging will come to will come out on the console. And I don't have to do anything special because this logger is automatically injected into the controller using dependency injection on the constructor. So something I wanted to know, let's just run this before I add the logging, is certain, like I said, certain algorithms run slower than others. And as you get bigger in the size of the maze, it actually will take longer to generate. So if I click at this point, that was actually pretty quick for the Aldous Broder. But if I go to hunt and kill and click generate, it's going to take a little bit longer. And so, and when I was generating large mazes, I didn't know where my bottleneck was. I didn't know, okay, is the algorithm taking a long time? Is creating the bitmap taking a long time? And I actually found out that the bigger file size you go on the bitmap, the longer it takes to generate. So I had to do some optimization there. But I wanted to find this out, and I can do that with some debug logging. So I'm in my maze controller in the generate method, because here, let me just add some line breaks here. On line 67, this is generating the maze. Okay, so this is running the algorithm. So if it's a random walk, it's running that random walk algorithm. Line 69, where it says get graphical maze, this is generating the bitmap. So this is actually going through and putting the lines and the colors and everything, creating a bitmap image. So I'm going to wrap this with some logging. So I have a logger field. And again, based on, this came in for free when I copied from the home controller. So I don't have to do anything special. And then I could say .log, and oh, here's all the things. So we have log critical, log debug, log error, log information, log trace, and log warning. So in this case, we're logging debug because that's what we want. And oh, I don't feel like typing all this. So I'm going to paste in that string. So this puts date time now, and then it says, okay, I'm starting the maze generation. And then I can take the same one and say, finished. You get the idea. Okay, finished maze generation. And then we could do the same thing for the bitmap. So starting bitmap. Okay, apparently I've been going too long because my brain is stopping. Finished bitmap. Okay. So again, what's nice is that I don't have to do anything else. The default template already says, okay, these loggers are already set up for you. I did some configuration, specifically log debug. I could have put these in as information messages, but I wanted them to stick out a little bit more on the console. So I log these messages in without doing anything else, and I will magically get logging on my console. Okay, so these should go back here. These info messages, these are those Microsoft.whatever.lifetime messages. Okay, so I'm going to do 125, a little bit larger, Rust, and I'm going to start with Aldous Broder. And so this takes several seconds to generate, but I can actually see where my bottlenecks were. So between the start maze generation and the finish maze generation, no time at all. This algorithm is very fast. That's actually why people use it. But it took about 3 seconds to generate the bitmap. So that gives me some clues as far as where my bottlenecks are. If I were to say hunt and kill, which is one of the slower algorithms, and we could actually come back here and watch them pop out. So it says starting maze generation. And this is not an instant algorithm. And so in this case, it took about 8 seconds to generate the maze, and then about 3 seconds to generate the bitmap. The bitmap generation should be fairly constant. So if I have a grid that's 125, the bitmap output should be the same for all of them. So this was really helpful as I was trying to figure out, okay, where are my bottlenecks? Because, I start doing like 250 recursive backtracker, and this is probably going to take 30 seconds to generate, but we'll just kind of watch it happen. So as you can see, logging is there and it's built in and it's automatically put in starting with .NET 5. So if you do file new project or use the .NET new MVC, like I started out, then that home controller has the logger already there. It has the logging field and everything. So that's pretty cool. Okay. Whew. Okay, well, this gives me a chance to slow down as I'm waiting for this to generate. Okay, so let's see. How long did this take? Oh, okay. So actually, the maze generation itself for this algorithm took almost no time, but the bitmap generation actually took almost a minute or 45 seconds. And you can see this has a lot of little tiny lines if we look at it. So this is quite a detailed maze if we kind of look around. So the fact that this takes a while to generate is not really that much of a surprise. Okay, I think I did logging in 10 minutes or less, as I promised. Okay, let's flip back to the slides and just kind of review the conventions, because kind of the first time we went through these was looking at the default template. Second time we're going through these is after we added the maze capability. So a little bit of a different light. So again, the routing, the default route controller name / action name / ID. In our case, we posted our form to the maze, the maze route, which would say, hey, go to the maze controller, run the index method. So, and again, custom routing is common, especially in more complex applications. When we're talking about controllers, I put the maze controller into the controllers folder. I named it maze controller. ASP.NVC was able to find it automatically. So that's cool. I didn't have to go in and configure and say, oh, well, if somebody asks for the maze controller, go run this class. It gets auto-wired. Again, with the actions, same thing. Somebody wants the index action, then we have an index function. And we did see with iAction result, we can return a view. We can return a file, which is the bitmap that we're returning in our final product. And then we also did see string content when I was returning the parameters directly. When we're talking about views, again, those go into the view / controller name folder based on the action name. And then they can also be in the shared folder if it's something that's used across controllers. Yeah, and then the views are named after the action. Now, there are ways you can do that where when you return a view, you can specify a different view. You can give it a name, tell it exactly which one you want to return. But again, kind of the default auto-wired stuff uses all of these conventions. And then we saw the the @ sign in the Razor views is, hey, there's some C# code coming. And we actually did see that text box for size, which was a way for us to not have to do our own data binding. That was kind of nice. So we wired up a model that had a size property on it. We said, hey, go ahead and give me a text box for this property. And then we posted those results back in the form. We asked for them as a parameter on the index method, and it just kind of magically made it there. So, and again, there's ways to customize all of this. Extremely powerful. But the cool thing is that there's so much built in that if you just kind of know the little secret codes, you can get there. So there's actually one more thing that I would like to show you, and that is coming from the oh, so many browser windows. This is actually coming from the GitHub repo. One of these other resource links that I have at the bottom is a code tour. Actually, I'll point out this article. So I do have an article for the secret code ASP.NET MVC conventions. So if you want to read kind of that first part with the default template in text form, it's there. I also have another repo that has a code tour on it. And this uses a plugin for Visual Studio Code. Let me just open this folder. Okay. So I have an extension which is called Code Tour installed. And and then this, the repo that's pointed to in that resource has a code tour on it. So if we look in the Explorer bar with the Code Tour plugin installed, since this project has code tours, there's one here, I can click on this little Start Tour button. And what it'll do is it'll walk me through the code with these markup boxes in them. So there's an intro, there's showing how to run this project, how our routes mapped. And so this kind of walks through each line that says, okay, well, here's mapping the controller route. Here's the name, which is default. And here's the controller action ID, along with explanations of these. So if you kind of want more of a guide me through that default template thing again, that this code tour is actually pretty cool. And I have to say it's pretty cool because I wrote it. I didn't write the plugin, but I wrote the code tour. So that's a resource that you can use if you are doing this later. So did I miss any questions? Are there any other questions? Otherwise, I would say thank you so much for joining me for these 2 hours. And I had a lot of fun. In case you haven't figured it out, I get way too excited about this stuff.
I don't see any pending questions, but feel free to throw them there in the chat. It's about 8 o'clock right now, which is about when we usually wrap up, but we've got to get through prizes next, of course. So stick around, everybody. I'm going to get the prizes going. I had a little bit of a problem here with the chat bot that I normally use to give away prizes. So we're going to do it manually here. We're going to go old school here with Excel, and we're going to do this manually. So I'm pasting a list of all the users that are in the channel right now, and we're just going to draw random numbers, and whoever gets those numbers wins. We do have some questions coming up in the chat there, Jeremy, if you want to address those while I get everything set up.
Yes, so I do see one that I can't answer. If I have an EF6 question about connecting and mapping data in 2 different contexts, an identity context user ID to data connected to that user in the business context, where could I look? That is an excellent question, and I do not have an answer to that. I would probably, I would probably head towards Phil Japixi again, because in addition to ASP.NET MVC, he also does a lot of EF stuff. So he, EF before EF Core and EF Core. So I would look for him and his resources, because he actually does a full day workshop at various events from time to time, which involve building an application with with Entity Framework and how everything wires together and validation and everything else. So I would point you towards Phil Japixi. He is Schematic in various places, like on Twitter, Skimedic, and that's because he's part of Ski Patrol. He's a paramedic with Ski Patrol. So you can look for Schematic online. How to send debug messages? How do debug messages end up in a file? Unfortunately, I don't have that information off the top of my head. I'm actually, like I mentioned, I've been planning on writing an article about logging. Let me see.
I think generally speaking, you do that with a logging framework, right? Like nlog
Well, yeah, you can definitely
like
plug
that.
in your own framework. That's possible, but I believe there's a way of doing it with the built-in framework. Let me check my bookmarks that I have, because I had a really good, oh, look at this. I had a good set of Microsoft articles. Let's see. Probably this one.
All right. So, if there are any other questions while Jeremy's looking for that, I think we're ready to go with some a raffle drawing, if that's okay. So we've got a lot of prizes to give away today. So we've got 3 JetBrains licenses. So that's for any JetBrains product. That includes ReSharper, of course, and Writer, but also other products like TeamCity and RubyMine, PHP Storm, whatever. Any of their products you can get with that license. We have 3 of those to give away today. 3 licenses. And so all I ask is that if you win one of these licenses, please redeem it. At a certain point, if these licenses don't get redeemed, we may lose future licenses. So if you are not going to use it, then please just say so and we'll give it to somebody else. Otherwise, I ask you please redeem it. And the 4th place is I have some Couchbase swag I can mail to you as well. So just some stickers, and I think I have maybe a baseball cap or something. So nothing terribly crazy there. That's the 4th place prize. Okay, so here is here's the list of users. We have 46 users, numbered 1 through 46, and I've got a random number generator, numbered 1 through 46. Before I pick, do you have those links? You want me to throw in the chat there, Jeremy? Or
So actually, yeah.
Okay.
Let me do that, because
Okay.
that'll get it. And I'm actually was going to throw them onto that repo as well.
Okay.
So, but
fine.
let me give it to you so that you can stick it in the chat.
Okay. All right. There's
Yeah.
the links there. So
It's a very extensive article about logging in ASP.NET Core. So,
all right. So I'm going to move the Excel just slightly on top of you there, Jeremy. Don't mind me.
I won't be offended.
All right. First one. This will be a first JetBrains license. Oh, by the way, to get this license, all I need is your email address. So if you win, please just send me an email at this address right here, me@mgroves.com, which I think I'm in front of, actually. Let me move that. Move that up here. There we go. So just send me an email, and I will send you the license. The first winner is number 20, FTOPAYR. Are you in the channel? FTOPAYR. FTOPAYR. Are you around? Please say something in the channel, or we'll have to go on to the next winner. You know what? We might just save the Couchbase swag for another meeting, since we have so many JetBrains prizes. We'll just give away the 3 JetBrains licenses. So FTOPAYR going once, going twice. All right, you are gone. All right, next winner is 35. This is PGKLADA, another seemingly random set of letters. PGKLADA. Are you there? If you are still around, say so please and claim your... All right, you get a JetBrains license. Please send me an email at the address up there at the top, or I'll just paste it here in the channel again, and I will get that license to you. So you are a winner. JetBrains. Okay. Just make sure to give me your email address so I can do that. Okay. Next winner. We've got number 3, who is Ashera138. Ashera138. Are you still around? Ashera, yes. All right. Congratulations. You also win a JetBrains license. Please send me your email address at that address right there, and I will get that license to you. Excellent. So far, so good. We got one more license to give away. I'm not going to promise we'll have 3 every month, but this month we have 3 to give away. So the next winner is 46, which is Virgo Praz. Virgo Praz, are you around? Hello, Virgo Praz. Claim your 3rd place prize, which is the same as the first 2 places. A JetBrains license. Virgo Praz. Are you there, Virgo Praz? You're going to miss out on a JetBrains license. Going once. Going twice. All right. We'll draw again. 43. The Eagles fan 005. Are you still around, Eagles fan 005? I saw Eagles fan chatting earlier in the presentation. Are you still around? Did you hang around for the prize? That's me. It is you. Okay, excellent. Congratulations. Send me an email there with your address, and I will get you a JetBrains license. All right. So I think that's all we're going to do today. I'll save some of this swag for next meeting because we probably won't have as many JetBrains licenses. And I'm running low on swag anyway. So if you know anybody or you are a company that wants to sponsor, it doesn't have to be terribly expensive, just a fun prize to give away to the Central Ohio community, you can contact me at that address and let me know, and we'll work something out for sure. If anyone else has any questions for Jeremy, go ahead and throw them in the chat there. But I do want to say thank you very much, Jeremy. I wish we were in person to give you a big round of applause, but this we can do right now is a bunch of emotes. So paste those there in the chat, and they will appear on the screen and float around. So everybody give him a virtual round of applause, if you would, and I'll add a little soundtrack to that, little golf clap. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And again, thanks for having me. I love sharing these are all struggles that I had. So I love helping people get past the struggles so they don't have to go through the ones I went through. And also I added that logging article. I added a link to the resources in the GitHub repo. So if you go out there, you will find it. And again, thank you so much for letting me take your time this evening.
There is one more question here. Where would you recommend someone for next steps, maybe intermediate level, maybe like a book or a Pluralsight course or a website or something you'd recommend? Maybe your own website, perhaps?
Actually, not my own website, because I really I don't go deeper than this on my website. I would send you to Phil Japixi, Schematic. He has GitHub repos with tons of code. He also is a book writer. So if you're a book person, he has some A-Press books that have a lot of this information as well. So he's a friend of mine that is really good. So he's always kind of my first resource for that.
It's been a while since I've looked at this book series, but there was a series of books on ASP.NET MVC. You probably remember the very first one with Nerd Jenner. Hanselman was an author. There was Phil Hack was an author. That was ASP.NET version 1. It was one of my favorite tech books of all time, and I think they've continued that series. I'm not sure if there's one out for .NET 5 yet. Probably not, but it's a great series of books. I think it's just called ASP.NET MVC for Professionals or something like that. It's a great series of books. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Please come back and check us out next month and follow us on social media and Meetup to get more announcements about that. And if you have any recommendations for speakers or if you want to speak, please feel free to contact me. So, Jeremy, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, everybody else. And we're going to shut down the Twitch stream now.